Hello, I'm Honey, and welcome to Two Booknet Stalking, a bookish podcast. We have been around for about 3 years.
Hi, I'm Diana, and together we believe that a good discussion can bring a book to life and give you a better understanding of the world we live in.
This is the first episode of our Literature for Equality project. I know it sounds super serious and brainy, but really, all it is an invitation for you to join us as we explore 8 books that talks about gender issues.
We've put together a selection of books from Asian lit to Greek retellings, poetry, local Malaysian mythology, even a graphic novel. All you have to do is sit back and listen to our discussions, and there are questions and activities we've prepared for you so you can take the conversation further.
Yes, so let's get straight into it. Welcome to the Nerd Den. Today we will be taking you into the rich world of Iban culture and mythology with Golda Mowe's Iban Woman.
Iban Woman by Golda Mowe. 20-year-old Ratai is a proud Iban woman. She is a keen huntress and trapper, but not very good at weaving and planting rice, which are considered to be desirable in a girl. She is also of marriageable age, and her childhood friend Sagan has started to show interest in her. Ratai likes him, but wonders if being a wife and mother is all there is she could aspire to. She tries nevertheless to attain this idea of a perfect girl by attempting a god weave, a pattern that made her fall into a deep illness. Wandering in the spirit world, she meets Salampadai, the god that hammers humans into existence and assigns gender by giving them a choice of a spear or a spindle. Ratai discovers that she chose a spindle, but then stole a spearhead. After proving herself to Kumang, the goddess of weaving, Ratai recovers, which sends Sagan towards his own quest to prove his worth. He is killed by foreign invaders, and soon Ratai's peaceful world is swept into talk of war. She too wants to join the fight to avenge Sagan, and what follows is a heroine's journey as Ratai finds her purpose and identity by letting go of her own desires of perfection based on her tribe's expectations and forges her way in the world.
Ratai is a young huntress, and this book takes us into her world and her struggles as she tries to reconcile the expectations of being a perfect girl and her own strong desires to explore a bigger world. Now, this is a really good YA book. Even I got stuck into it because the Iban mythology and the belief system is so rich. I mean, you really get immersed into her world, you really get into her head as she tussles with insecurities and feeling of inadequacies. And I feel that we all go through these moments, no matter if you lived 100 years ago in a longhouse or today in modern KL. So the story kicks off when her neighbor Sagan started showing interest in her. She is confused and she's excited, and she wants to be this perfect woman, even as she questions her place in the world.
She liked her young neighbor, but she was confused about her feelings towards him. She wanted him to be close to her, but she did not want him to speak to her. Each time he tried to do so, she would respond harshly. She felt so bad at times because she wanted to treat him better. She longed for him to think of her as being gentle, feminine, and kind. Yet, another side of her wanted badly to reject him outright. Her mother Nambi had often talked to her about the bliss of marriage, but Ratai wanted more than just the bearing of children and the planting of fertile fields. She wanted to see new places, visit new people. She had heard so many different versions of the story about how her parents had traveled to this land. She wanted to get a taste of what they had experienced. Sagan was a sweet man, but he did not have the adventurous mettle that she needed from a man who would lead the life she wanted to experience.
Okay, so can you relate to what Ratai is going through, Diana? What are your thoughts?
I think for Ratai, you sort of feel most of us have been at that stage where we are kind of right at that point where you're supposed to look after yourself. You're supposed to be able to step into the next stage of your life. And can anyone say that they don't ever feel that pressure to like fit into society? You want to be what everyone's ideal of a girl is, right?
I mean, I went to an all-girls boarding school and there's a lot of pressure there to perform in exams and to conform to certain expectations of being a girl. You have to look after how you carry yourself. You get reprimanded if you talk too loudly. You need to be a good Muslim woman as well. You still need to do well in exams. You also need to know how to cook and not be too aggressive. So there's all these things coming at you and you're just trying to navigate your way through growing up, basically. And in those days, I remembered there were SRT classes. I know for all of you young ones out there, SRT, Suri Rumah Tangga, is an actual subject matter where you learn how to sew and where you learn how to cook. But during my time, it changed into Kemahiran Hidup. So you not only know how to make a blouse or make some really hard rock buns, you also learn how to repair a toilet and work on a circuit board. I built a rack to hold my shampoo. There is a bit of a change nowadays to try and give people more choices and more encouragement to do different things and to find what you're good at, not just pigeonhole you into one thing. So I kind of get it when Ratai starts questioning why things are done a certain way, because I remember questioning it myself.
Yeah, and Ratai is at that stage of her life where she starts noticing boys and boys start noticing her. It's always a really hard and awkward time of life, especially because you're not really sure who you are as a person yet. And when you're not sure who you are as a person, it can be hard to know who's the right person for you. But, you know, you want to be accepted. You want to be seen, right? So when Sagan sees her, when Sagan notices her and Sagan shows interest in her, that's when she feels like, oh, you know, this means that I have that value. That's how you start off a lot of times, but you feel like the only way to validate who you are as a person is if somebody else validates you. I think a lot of people can imagine themselves in Ratai's place.
I think so. It's that need to be seen, right? For the first time, seeing yourself through a boy's eyes or a person that you find attractive's eyes and wanting to be that person. Right?
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting about Ratai is that she is actually a much better huntress. She's much better at trapping than Sagan. So she's better at doing man's work, so to speak. And I thought how Mowe deals with this sort of like figuring out identity was really good in a way that when she went into the spirit world and she meets the Iban spirit Salam Padai, he is the creator god, and it shed some light into why she's conflicted, because Salam Padai said when he was hammering her into existence, she chose a spindle, i.e. a woman, but she stole a spearhead from him, i.e. a man's kind of like a skill set. So he said that is why she was confused and why she is restless in everything she does. And of course, after that, she says, please give me the spindle, give me back the spindle. And then you're thinking like, oh my God, if only life is that easy.
Yeah.
If only you're like, please give me ladylike qualities and it will be bestowed upon you.
Yeah, I sort of felt while reading this that it's so real, because how many of us really feel that we are actually fitting that mold of what society tells us is a perfect woman, right? So many people look at Instagram, they go online and they see all these images of women who really know how to be womanly, and you have this idea like, oh, you know, if only I looked like her, if only I had those skills, I could be really successful as a woman as well. One of the things that Ratai really makes you understand is that all of us are individuals because all of us have certain things that we bring with us. We have these skills that are inherent in us that may not quite fit the mold, right? I was pretty much a tomboy when I was younger. What about you, honey?
Yep. And I think for a long time, I wondered why I had such a big bottom. Because, all these ideals of women always had very slim kind of like figures, like nice long legs, beautiful hair. And I remembered, like, I think this is something that happens to pretty much all of us when we look at ourselves in the mirror and you wonder, if only I have this, or if only I had that. If you had a face full of pimples, you go, if only I had clearer skin. Criticizing oneself happens pretty much to everybody, I think, as you are growing up. And I think it doesn't help that I also felt that boys were doing more interesting things than girls because they were out there, catching those worms, doing whatever boys do. I know this is very cliche. I apologize to all boys out there. But I always felt they were doing more interesting things than me. And I can relate that with Ratai when she herself looks down on women's work because it felt too small for her. And then she realized when she was in the spirit world and she met the goddess Kemang, who is the goddess of weavers, that women's work is absolutely no way inferior to men's work.
She had grown up believing that weaving and planting were inferior to hunting. But now, sitting before the goddess, she realized that her role as a woman was to support life, to grow life. Planting, birthing, and weaving were in no way inferior to any other role. Ratai hung her head, believing that she did not deserve to look upon the goddess's beauty.
So, this is what occurred to me when I was reading this book, that even though work and responsibilities in the longhouse was divided by gender, both are actually afforded equal respect because everybody needed to do their jobs in order for the tribe to survive. So it made sense that men who had more physical strength will hunt and carry back meat to the tribe and protect the tribe, and women who are more meticulous and patient would plant rice and weave the clothing that people wear. It was said that if a woman doesn't know how to weave and plant, your family will go hungry and will go naked. So even though men can hunt for food, everyday survival is actually reliant on women. I mean, Ratai, I guess, felt that if I could hunt, my family won't go hungry, right? But I think you have to grow up a little bit more to see like why certain things are important. But of course, knowing something and believing in something is two different things. And Ratai does feel like a failure because she cannot do traditional women things well.
Ratai turned her back to the spirit and sat down on the ground with a heavy sigh. She felt defeated, useless. Her existence felt pointless. There was so much she wanted to do. She thought that the more she could do, the more she would be accepted and admired. Yet, all her aspirations had fallen short of total success. She could do modern bath, but she could not weave. She could clear a forest, but she could not plant. No matter how hard she tried, she could never become a master at any skill.
Yeah, I know when reading this book, you kind of feel for Ratai because, like you were saying, honey, it feels like boys do so much more interesting things. Like they go out in the world, they get to explore, and I think there's this idea that girls don't like doing that, but everyone knows that's not true. It's just that girls have always had to stay closer to home. Women's work, it's not that weaving or planting is that kind of thing is not hard work. It's not like it doesn't require a lot of physical strength just like men do. It's just that it's just more interesting to try different things, and boys get to go out and try different things that you haven't always experienced all throughout your childhood. Whereas girls, like I've seen my mother do these things 1,000 times. It doesn't feel like it's anything new. And we celebrate when men bring meat home. We celebrate when men like do big things, right? And who doesn't want a part of that? So
It's like, here I am bringing a wild boar on my shoulders home.
And
Woohoo,
everyone's going
party!
around cheering, right? So, and in the modern context, right, this whole idea of being the perfect woman or the perfect girl. So there's this article in The Guardian. According to this clinical psychologist, Linda Blair, this idea of perfection that we have as a person, we're a person who strives for flawlessness, for a perfect creation, outcome of performance. People who want perfection find it difficult to delegate, even if that means neglecting their health, relationships, and well-being in pursuit of a perfect outcome. And I have to admit, I'm kind of like that in my own life as well. I kind of feel like if my house isn't in perfect order, if I can't prove that I can hold down my job well and do it well to the satisfaction of my boss, and then come home and then have everything be perfect as well, and have my children grow up happy and having all the trappings that other people see as having been successful, it kind of makes me feel very anxious. So this is the kind of burden that we always put on ourselves, this idea of perfection. It's probably not a coincidence that it largely affects women because, we have so many spheres that we have to fulfill. So women are more likely to feel inadequate at home and at work, and they often have imposter syndrome. And girls as young as 7 have this desire to be perfect. Reshma Saljani, the founder of non-profit organization Girls Who Code, put it very succinctly. Girls are raised to be perfect, boys to be brave. Like boys get to go out there and they get to try different things. And even when they do stupid stuff, we say, oh no, that's all right. That's a boy thing. But girls, if you do something wrong, you should know better. You're a girl.
That's a really good point because it's sort of like the acceptance of failure, right? Because if you're trained to be brave and you go and you do something and you're not successful, it's okay because you were brave enough to try it. But if you're raised to be perfect, failure is almost not an option, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is so interesting. I mean, this is what's really fascinating about doing this project as well. And then looking through all these sort of books that talks about gender inequality. But not only that, it's the pressures that we ourselves as a society put on the girls and boys within that society. This idea of what is a dutiful wife, the idea of what is a dutiful daughter, and the fact that a lot of this pressure is actually internalized within you, because I feel that a lot of people also raise their children to want to attain this sort of perfection because they feel these are the skills that you need. And today is even worse, I feel, because you have social media. There's so much pressure out there for people to look unrealistic, for people to aspire to a very curated life that people put on their Instagram.
Curated is the perfect word. It's sort of like curated just tells you this is designed this way, right? This is put together. This is planned. This is not organic. This is not real. It's not. How many of us really grow up knowing exactly how to make the best of our own appearance? Like we have to experiment for years in order to figure out that let's not try putting like pink eyeliner on all the time and think that makes you look edgy, right? It doesn't. You don't have to like go through all these different stages of going like goth and all that just to try and see, if I can't achieve perfect princess looks, I'm gonna have to go the other way just to show that I don't care, even though I care. I think that's so sad because none of us are encouraged to just enjoy being ourselves and exploring our identities, because identities are not fixed. We don't know who we are when we're born. And we still trying to figure it out. Ask anyone who's in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They'll tell you it takes a while for you to figure out who you actually want to be.
Yeah, definitely. And back to the stuff that you see on social media, what you were saying, when people were experimenting on what works for them, on their looks, on the best angle, all these things you don't see. This is behind the scenes. I mean, I work in the production industry, so I know a lot about editing. Because what you see as the final product is not what you originally shot. It takes a village to make a starlet look good.
Yeah.
It takes an entire village to make somebody like Kim Kardashian look amazing. And here we are doing it all by ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, if Kylie Jenner Like she already looks so good to begin with, and then she still needs to see a plastic surgeon. She still needs to have all those makeup on. She needs a makeup artist. She needs people to help her with everything in her house. How do you imagine that, like she can get to looking perfect? And she's still supposed to be very insecure. Can you imagine what we're doing to normal girls every day? Because we're telling them that, you have to do all of these things. But hey, at the end of the day, you might still not be happy.
Yeah. I think you have to accept that certain things are aspirational, like what you see on social media is aspirational. But it's not to say that you should not try to be the best of yourself. But I feel that it is a lot harder. And I think you already have your insecurities, right? But it's compounded when if you put something wrong on social media or you do something embarrassing, everybody knows. But the good news is that everybody knows, but in like 15 minutes, your attentions will be elsewhere. So you know what I mean? It's sort of like, it's not like, oh, you did something wrong in the longhouse, right? So there's all these tribal drums telling other longhouses what you did wrong. And then like 5 weeks later, people are still talking about it. So, you have to balance. You have to keep things in perspective, I guess.
Yeah, maybe this is why we all want to go back to that kind of agrarian lifestyle, because like back then it was so much simpler and easier. And I think I kind of feel like it doesn't mean there's no pressures. You definitely see that, like this idea of wanting to be the best woman you can be. And, I think it's really hard to get past, to get to the stage where you're just happy with who you are, right? So
I'm not sure I want to go back to agrarian lifestyle because life was hard and people's lifespan was very short. When you die by 50 or something, I think you have less time to obsess over things. This is the end of part 1. For discussion topics and some fun activities, go to rngdr.com/LFE. This is part 2 of the Iban Woman book discussion. In part 1, we get to know Ratai, our protagonist, and explore the themes of being a perfect girl. Part 2 will dive further into Iban Woman, exploring other themes as well as our own nerdy takeaways from reading this book. Listen on.
So right up to the very end of the book, Ratai questions her place in the world. And what comes across is that none of us have the answers, and you really don't need to have them. Because, each of us is a work in progress. And as the book goes on and Ratai learns more about her own worth, she starts asking other questions. Instead of asking, why am I not able to weave or embody this idea of a perfect wife? She questions the larger world, as in how a woman is valued in the world. So this makes Iban Woman a coming-of-age story too, from a protagonist who is haunted by her own shortcomings and eventually growing up to become an agent of change.
One of my favorite parts in the book is when she questions her uncle Uyut on what makes a man wise. And he tells her that a wise man is a widely traveled man because he will find better ways of doing old things and for better things to take the place of old things. So there is absolutely a desire to not be stagnant, right? And he says that, well, a man who is prosperous, we call them orang kaya, and a man who has power, we call him Raja. And then Ratai asks, what about a woman? What would you call a woman who is wise, rich, and powerful? Her uncle can't really answer this because he views the world through his lenses. And I think that's a very valid question, because if a wise man is a man who travels, then wouldn't a wise woman be a woman who travels as well?
I think from her uncle's point of view, you can actually really see how it's hard to understand the perspective, because when you're somebody who is, you're able to access that kind of power easily because of your gender, right? Because, for men, you have this path laid out for you. You can become an orang kaya, you can become a raja, but, you don't see that for women, it's limited. So for him, he doesn't understand what it's like for a woman who wants more from her life. Right? Because you figure, that's not what women want. But women are just people. You don't have to think of them as, like a completely separate kind of person. And that's a problem with a lot of gender. When we talk about gender, you think, oh, no, girls like this and boys like this. But, No, there's no real hard rules about how girls are meant to be and boys are meant to be. I think that's something that all of us need to understand. For Ratai, she's got this push and pull. So one moment she's sure of herself, and another moment she's doubting her abilities. And that's something I think we can all relate to. Just because a piece of the puzzle falls into place and you understand something about yourself better, it doesn't mean you will not have more questions. And that's gratifying when she recognizes her own worth. When she comes back to the longhouse triumphant after a battle, Ratai feels comfortable in her own skin, and she knows what she wants from her life now.
She was sure of her place in the longhouse, in the farm, and in her home. She spoke with more forcefulness. She no longer felt herself inferior to the women for being unskilled in feminine pursuits, nor did she feel inferior to the men for not being a physical man. She was Ratai, the female who had the gall to steal a spearhead from Selampadai.
That was nice. I mean, the arc of Ratai is definitely what we call a hero's journey. And it's lovely when you read something that is set within the feminine or the female experience, or what a heroine's journey is. I mean, nowadays people even say don't call a female actor an actress, right? Because they don't want you to actually make gender as a big a deal. In this case, it is a hero's journey. It's just that your hero is a young girl. Okay, so let's circle back to just a few takeaways that you have from this book, Diana, because this is what we want you to think about as well if you want to start conversations. It's the kind of takeaways that you can get from either listening to our podcast or reading the book and looking at the questions that we have put up on our website. What about you, Diana? What are some of your takeaways?
Iban Woman is actually a really well-written book. It's a wonderful way to question the idea of gender stereotypical behavior. And really, I love the whole theme of understanding how we put pressure upon ourselves to fit into the things society has told us about how to achieve success in life. The ironic thing is that Ratai put all this pressure on herself to be a good weaver, to be a successful rice farmer, when you could see that her family were proud of her achievements. And even Sagan, he was interested in her even though she was seen as tomboyish. Like Ratai, a lot of girls put a lot of pressure on themselves to know how to dress well and look well. They also feel they aren't good enough if they don't own the right kind of cool accessories and stuff, or if they don't have a big following on TikTok. And all of this gives rise to a lot of mental health issues in girls. It's the whole idea of not being enough and forever trying to live up to the ideal of being a perfect girl, when honestly, there's no such thing as being a perfect girl. There's just so many people who will complain and pick on the things we do that aren't perfect. It's just really impossible to please them all. All we can really do is to be true to the best version of ourselves.
Amen, sister. Can't make everybody happy. It's hard, isn't it? Especially when there's so many people out there that are only too happy to tell you when you are not doing something right. All of us know these sort of people. And the part of the book that was very striking to me was on how stories that we tell ourselves and stories that we tell to our children can reinforce certain behavior. You mentioned earlier, right, about how a girl is raised to be perfect and a boy to be brave. So when Ratai decided she wanted to go into battle, the other men, disgruntled by this, told stories of brave women of the past and what they see a brave woman should do.
The discussion naturally moved to Lao Mao's daughter Lanto, who begot Tindin, who went on to become a famed warrior. Banta looked pointedly at Ratai, as though to remind her of another brave woman who had kept her place in the home, and passed on the warrior spirit to her son. Then they discussed the beautiful Rumampa, whose father was killed by a Bukitan chief. She swore that she would marry any man who could avenge her father's death. The great Beruang came, killed Chief Nginyum, and claimed his prize. This was what brave women do, they discussed loudly among themselves. A woman's role was to encourage brave men to go to war on their behalf.
And what is interesting is that how the stories actually change after Ratai's success in battle. Suddenly, the men are reminded of other women who in the past have done heroic things and things that are seen to be so-called manly things.
Ratai earned her warrior name early from the men because they believed that it was she who protected them from the demon huntsman. They called her the maiden who blinds the enemy, Endu Engkerabun Munso, and they fettered her with stories of women from legend. Some men recalled stories that they heard of Sabai and Sinja, who had joined men at war and broken through the fort of their enemy. They also spoke in awe of the mighty woman Dayang Ridu, who had led a dangerous migration to Pade. Then they marveled that they should see this happening before their very eyes.
So stories are really powerful in that sense. Stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, so we look far enough in why we hold on to certain beliefs. It goes back to when people are telling children stories and those stories that reinforce what they want them to internalize. Like they tell girls, you must learn to cook or otherwise you won't find a husband. Don't be so loud and so rough. That's how girls are supposed to behave. And think of all the things that are tacked onto your worth. If you say them enough times, you sort of internalize it and you accept it as truth.
Yeah. Next week, we're going to be talking about we should all be feminists. And this sort of like what is accepted truths will be explored further in that book. So definitely stay tuned for that episode. Okay, so we usually, for our podcast, we always ask each other why you should read this book. So I feel, honestly, just going into the world of Iban gods and mythology is enough to keep this a really exciting read. I mean, we know Greek gods and Norse gods thanks to Percy Jackson and Avengers, but how about closer to home? How about finding out about Iban gods? Because they are so interesting. I want an entire book on them. And the storytelling is also very layered. There's a lot to discuss here, especially on the issues of perfection and societal pressures on girls to behave a certain way. And again, it's a hero's journey. It's no less epic than something like the Odyssey or Lord of the Rings, whose protagonists are usually male.
One nice thing about reading a book like this is that it puts us in a different society, in a more traditional one. And we always have this idea, I think, in general, that we're better off now because we've come so far in society, we've actually improved things. But it's not necessarily true that that's the way that things always were. We could definitely see that, that we have all these stories of women who actually stood up and spoke out and did things that weren't considered to be the province of women, right? Like stories of Famulan. A lot of women have actually done things that maybe we haven't heard about because, like women's stories aren't often told. So it's good to read a book like this and realize that even if you feel different and you feel like you don't fit in, that's not something new. That's something that we've only come to in these modern times, right? It's always been something that everyone has struggled with. And that's actually why we should be more inclusive, because all of us have these kind of feelings. Most of us can't fit into this narrow mold of what, we think that all men should be and all women should be. It's really hard for most people to fit into that kind of mold. So we're getting to this place where we're more open to diversity and inclusivity, but I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, right? Especially in terms of opportunities for girls, how women are treated in corporate culture, and, of course, the way domestic duties are split in a household. But if people in Ratai's world can overcome their narrow prejudices and accept Ratai for being a different kind of girl, well, I think there's hope for a modern world.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, how we treat people, both boys and girls, is important. It's important to be able to surround yourself with people who support you and also to support those around you. I mean, after all, this is how we break away from gender stereotypes. I would not be the person I am today if I did not have a family who felt education was important regardless of gender. My mother always told me that a woman needs to be able to make her own money and support herself. And my father never told me I could not do something just because I'm a girl. So I want to leave you with this wonderful bit when Ratai's father Nuing gave her the strength when she needed it.
Acknowledging her pain was akin to admitting that he can see her unhappiness. And if he admitted to seeing her unhappiness, it meant that she had failed. Despite that, he decided that his place was by her side, and that it was his duty to assure her that the unhappiness felt was only temporary. His first child was magnificent, like the stars in the sky. Her joy was his. Her pain was his. She was not his flesh, yet he felt as though only they understood each other. Maybe you tried too hard, Nuing said. He realized now that he had acknowledged her failure. He must do everything he could to help her. She was his child after all. You were never meant to be mediocre. Sagan was not a man of adventure. He was not your equal.
Oh, that gives me a bit of a lump in my throat. You were saying earlier about how everybody wants to be seen, and having somebody that cares about you vocalize your truth, that's pretty powerful stuff. Okay, now that we all have the feels and you have listened to this discussion, we now would like to hear what you think. Why not make a TikTok video on the idea of perfection and what you think about it? Or post something on IG on your own interests and why it's important to you. You can even start a Twitter thread about what beautiful means to you and not what the standards that are out there. Or you can also post stuff to Facebook about your favorite quotes from Iban Woman. You can write an essay, you can do a vlog. Really, you can wow us with your creativity. We just like to know what you think of the book, Iban Woman.
And if you do actually go and post about this, we actually have a contest for you, which is called the Literature for Equality Project Contest, which runs from the 17th of October 2021 all the way to the 16th of January 2022. It basically just do the kind of things that Honey mentioned, and you're free to respond to any of the episodes in the Literature for Equality Project.
Or maybe you might want to respond to all 8 of the episodes in this series. Yay! Huzzah! Power to you! The contest is open to any students aged between 12 to 20, currently studying in Malaysia. And there are 2 categories, young adult, which is 12 to 16, and secondary to tertiary, which is 17 to 20. And you can win some pretty cool prizes. But seriously, do it for bragging rights. So do keep up to date with our socials.
Don't forget to include the hashtag Literature for Equality Contest and tag us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. And then head over to the contest page on rngdr.com/LFE to submit your entry.
And if you'd like to get into some further reading, why not check out other retellings of our mythology? The YA books of Ninot Aziz reimagines our history and famous women of yore, such as in her book Siti, Queen of the Eastern Skies, which is on Cik Siti Wan Kembang, and Kirana, Dreams After the Rose, where a girl goes back in time and meets Tun Fatimah during the last days of Malacca. You can also check out a previous episode that we did on the Blood Prince of Lankasuka, where we talked to author Tutu Duta. This is in Season 4, Episode 14.
You can also immerse yourself in more Iban mythology by reading the other 2 books in the Iban Dream trilogy, Iban Dream, which tells of Ratai's grandfather Bujang, and Iban Journey, which is about her father Nuing. And it's a loose trilogy, but all books can be read as a standalone.
This is the first episode of the Literature for Equality project, which is brought to you by us, Two Bootnet Stalking, under the sponsorship of the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives. Do check out the other 7 episodes in the series to find episodes and more information on the project, including full contest details and additional materials. Check out our website at rngdr.com/tbnt.
This has been the Two Book Nerds Talking with myself, Diana Yong, and my lovely co-host, Hani Ahmad. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Bye!